Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends guys, welcome back to our /EntitledPeople, where people truly think they can have what they want, when they want, because they're special. And in today's episode, it's all about super entitled coworkers guys, and one OP tells a story about this one Karen who stalks their workplace. So yeah, sit back, relax, and seriously try not to shake your heads too hard in today's episode. Let's dive in. I crochet as a hobby, mostly beanies and backpacks, but I can do anything. I spent a lot of my youth making things for other people, and I've had a lot of my stuff turned down because I didn't get the exact color they were thinking of. As an adult, in order to save my time, money, and sanity, I always tell people the same thing when they ask me to make something. I say, bring me the yarn and I'll make whatever you want. It makes it so I don't have to spend money, and it weeds out the people who aren't serious. That all said, I work at a middle school, and students comment on my bag or my hat almost every day. It's extremely common for them to ask me to make them something, and I always tell them to bring me the yarn and I'll make whatever they want. A couple of kids have taken me up on the offer and it's worked out great. Then one day, a coworker who I'll call Mr. O overhears me talking to a student. I've worked with him for years, and I know this guy's a big earner, like more than $100,000 a year type of guy. I guess he never connected the dots I was making this stuff. So he comes right over and he asked me to make something for him. He started by asking if I could make dolls, which I can. He then asked if I could do a Chewbacca doll. He tells me it's for a nephew who really likes Star Wars, and he gets really excited when I tell him it's possible and should look great. I tell him about making the hair, the bandolier, a blaster, stuff like that, and he's loving it. Then comes the obligatory, bring me the yarn and I'll make it. He just brushes me off and he says no. He continues asking about the bandolier, is it removable, all that stuff. I bring it back to him going and buying the yarn by telling him what colors he needs to get. I tell him a few shades of brown, black, gray, colors he can find by just Googling Chewbacca and looking at a picture of him. Hearing that, he just looks at me like I suggested he go jump off a bridge or something, and he tells me there's no need for him to do that, I can do it just fine. I told him he was asking me to spend at least a dozen hours of my personal time to make something for him. So I needed him to put in a little time and effort to go to the store to pick out colors. Once again, he just laughs and he told me to do it for him. He would pay me back later. He then pats me on the back and left. Since then, every once in a while, he does check in with me about his Chewbacca doll. I keep telling him that I'm not spending my own money to get his nephew a doll. He just laughs it off and he asked when it'll be done. I tell him never, it'll never be done. At this point, I don't even care if he brings me the yarn. Yeah, that is definitely infuriating, especially since the guy seems to think that OP asking for yarn is a joke. Like, I just don't get how some people don't appreciate and recognize what others are doing for them. And like OP said, him buying the yarn was the least he could have done because OP's putting in the hours. And if you guys thought that was infuriating, this person shares their story and they say, so this happened a couple of months ago. I mentioned to a coworker that I make really good pulled pork. And I told him the next time I make a batch, I would bring him in a sandwich so he could try it. The next week, I made a batch and I brought in enough meat and buns to make everyone in the office a sandwich, about 6 people. I leave the pork in the fridge in the back office until lunchtime, and when I go back there to make the sandwiches, my stupid selfish coworker is loading the pork into a Tupperware container he brought from home. He then has the nerve to say to me, is this seriously all you made? I have 4 kids, you know. I respond, what are you talking about? He then says, you said you'd bring me in some pulled pork. I don't understand why this is all you brought. How am I supposed to feed my family with this amount? This isn't enough for us. This is when I tell him I brought in enough to make sandwiches for people in the office. I didn't say anything about cooking for your entire family. He then says to me, well, I guess this is gonna have to be enough. He then rolls his eyes and he says, my kids are excited because I told them I was bringing pulled pork home tonight. So now they're gonna be disappointed that they can only get a little bit each. He then looks at me right in the eyes and he says, bring more next time. Now, I really wish there was a happy ending where I told the idiot off and took my pork back home, but I didn't want to make a huge deal out of it. I told my coworkers that I would bring in more pulled pork the next week. So this occurred 2 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes. I was at work when my coworker Tim was talking about how he was so excited to be attending a concert in a large city as a birthday gift. I mentioned to Tim that my friends and I were going to that same concert and we were driving down. Since he was the only person attending from home city, we decided that he could carpool down with us in exchange for gas money. Tim said he had a place to stay and friends he was meeting in the large city. Therefore, we were to drop him off and pick him up before we left. The large city is 6 hours away from home city. We were only going one night, and also, my friends have never met Tim before. I also didn't know that my coworker Tim was like this. Here's a list of things that happened during the road trip. Number 1, Tim wasn't ready at the 8:30 a.m. meetup time. He ends up being a whole hour late. After we pick him up, he exclaims, "You guys didn't give me enough time to pack. I only brought my sweater." Number 2, we stop to buy a 6-pack for road pops, except the drivers, and Tim buys a $20 6-pack and cigarettes. He then tells our driver that he can't afford to pay him for gas for another month. Number 3, Tim starts heavily drinking throughout those 6 hours. We stop for food, and Tim starts asking people to pay for his food. Number 4, 20 minutes after the pit stop, Tim wants us to pull over because he needs a smoke. Number 5, in the car, he phones his girlfriend and he starts a fight with her for 45 minutes. They were screaming at each other. Number 6, he starts begging for everyone else's booze after he finishes his. Number 7, he wants me to hotspot him my Wi-Fi because he needs to go on social media. Number 8, he admits he hadn't arranged a place to stay, so he'll have to stay with us because, quote, he sees no problem with it. Also, we were staying at a friend's sibling's place. We were sleeping on the floor. And lastly, he admits he's not meeting friends in the large city. He lied about it, and now he wants to hang with us because we seem cool. Once we reach the large city, Tim's really drunk and he needs to pee. It was so bad that he wanted us to drop him off at a stoplight and then circle around the block for him until he was done. Well, we did that and drove away. Fortunately, we dropped him off a block away from the concert location. We went to our staying location and we ignored Tim's calls and we enjoyed the concert. My friend who drove refused to have Tim back in his car. So I end up texting Tim and I said to him, "Hey, my friends found you to be very rude and disrespectful in the car. I'm sorry, but we need you to find another way back to home city." Well, Tim starts freaking out because he has nowhere to stay because he canceled his cheap hostel. He told me he didn't save for this trip at all and he needs me to pay since I invited him. Then, when I didn't give in, he demanded that I pay for his bus ride back home because I didn't keep up my end of the bargain of driving him to and from the large city to home city. I told Tim that was not the exchange. We were kind enough to offer you a ride in the first place. You disrespected the driver and the car owner who will not drive you back. There's nothing I can do. Anyway, he couldn't afford the $60 bus ride home, so he gets our other coworker to drive 6 hours there and back for him. What a piece of work Tim was, right? And that coworker who drove the 6 hours and back for him, how did Tim manage to pull that, guys? But yeah, with all the things that OP was listing that Tim did, I don't know how they didn't leave him at the pit stop halfway. or even leave him at home being an hour late. And you really have to wonder, like, if he didn't have enough money to get there and back, like, how was he intending on getting there and back in the first place without OP? And if you think that was bad, this next coworker, oh boy. I used to work in an awful architectural firm, and I finally had the chance to switch to a better opportunity. I still keep in contact and hang out with a lot of former coworkers because they were the only reason why I lasted that long in that place. I was hanging out with one of them for drinks, and she was complaining that she needed to get out of there too, but she was having difficulty because she didn't have the means to update her portfolio and resume at home because her old laptop doesn't work anymore. I felt sympathy because that firm really sucked with the hours and pay. I had a spare laptop that I wasn't using, an old 15-inch MacBook Pro. I told her my laptop would serve her well because it had a ton of bootleg apps. Photoshop, Premiere Pro, Lightroom, all that stuff, that would easily total to more than $1,000 for sure. I offered to lend it to her for an indefinite time, but on 3 conditions. Number 1, she needs to pick it up from my house. Number 2, I need to transfer all personal and sensitive documents and files to my online drive first before lending it to her. And number 3, that she take care of it and she returns it in a timely manner after getting a new job. Well, instead of picking it up, she wanted me to bring it to her at her old office, which was the opposite direction of my new firm, or bring it to her apartment. I just told her that I'm not carrying my laptop around the city, and that if she wanted it really badly, she could go to my place to pick it up. She agreed, and she decided she wanted it tonight after our drinking session. So we head to my apartment, and I fix her more drinks from my personal stash. And I let her chill while I begin the process of going through all of my files to see what I can delete and take down. After going through all of my files, which have been in there for the last 7 years, it took me about an hour to finally transfer everything. Surprise, surprise, she was complaining the entire time how long I was taking. I was starting to get annoyed at her constant badgering, so I told her I'm lending her my laptop that has all the programs she needs to fix her portfolio and look for a better job. The least she can do is wait for me to delete all of my personal stuff on it. Anyways, she said thanks and she took it from me at the end of the night. About 3 months later, I get together with these group of former coworkers, and she was in the mix. We catch up, and that's when she brags about landing a job that paid $20,000 more than what she was making in the old firm. Instead of being happy, I couldn't help but to be irate when she complained about having to wait an hour in my stupid living room, and why I couldn't just lend her the laptop as is. And if you remember, she was drinking my bourbon on top of that. Snarkingly, I just told her that she should be thanking me instead of criticizing me, since my laptop helped her land the new job of hers that pays $20,000 more. I also mentioned if I didn't lend her my laptop to begin with, she probably wouldn't even make the application process in time because architectural jobs in my city get filled in rather quickly. She shut up after that. Fast forward 9 months later, she ditches that new $20,000 more job for another one that was higher paying, and she still hasn't returned my laptop. So 5+ years ago, I worked in an office with a coworker who we'll call entitled Chad. He was the kind of guy that always one-upped you. If you had good news, he had better news. If you had a crappy weekend, well, it was nothing compared to his. One day, our coworker comes in looking distraught, and we finally coaxed it out of her that her mom was recently diagnosed with breast cancer. Chad overhears, and suddenly, his dad was diagnosed with penile cancer and a heart attack on the same day. And seriously, if looks could have killed, he would have melted into the floor. A bunch of people went to HR, but in true HR style, he was too important. We can't prove it's false, blah blah blah. Nothing ever happened. We knew he was full of it, and there was no way half the stuff he said was true, but it wore you down. About 5 months later, we're talking about our weekends on Monday. I casually mention that my nephew took state in both grade and weight in a recent wrestling tournament. And who shall be overhearing this but Chad? Chad swoops in and he says, well, my nephew has plenty of wrestling medals. I bet he's not as good as my nephew. What's his name? I want to pull up his ranking. I gave him my nephew's name because Chad had jumped in right before I could tell my other coworkers that my nephew's been nationally ranked since he was 6 years old for both grade and weight class. I also didn't say that he recently accepted a prestigious invitation to wrestle for an international wrestling club, with a number of Olympians having come from the program. Winning state was a pre-qualifier to the program, but everyone knew he would get it done. I didn't know they posted stats for 4th graders online, but sure enough, he pulls up my nephew on the office computer. It only took a minute before he closes the window and tried to change the subject. A small crowd had gathered at this point, so I grabbed his keyboard and with Ctrl-Shift-T, I reopened the window promptly. Now, I don't know enough about wrestling stats to tell you how good he was, but others apparently did, and they were freaking out about his stats. I knew my nephew was good, but apparently he was a savant or something. People then start asking about Chad's nephew and his stats. Chad was floundering at this point and trying his best to backpedal, but no one would let him. We searched with his last name and we got no one that it could be. Chad then starts saying that it was his nephew on the other side. And the thing is, Chad had bragged about being related to the governor, so we knew what name to search, and still, no one with the right age range to be his nephew. Suddenly, Chad starts yelling that his nephew was in the 2nd grade, so it wasn't online. My nephew's stats were online from the 1st grade, so that was BS. Next came more excuses. He says, oh, well, my nephew lives in another state. But that didn't matter, as he was quickly shown wrestlers from other states, clubs, and leagues. Chad's face was turning every shade of red before he finally storms away, yelling something about harassment and being singled out and going to HR. HR did reach out, but we pointed out the blatant hypocrisy when others filed complaints about him. This is when a strongly worded email about unity, being a team player, and respect in the workplace was sent out that everyone ignored. I stayed there another 10 months or so before I moved jobs. Chad still tried his best to insert himself into conversations and one-up everyone. But all it took was someone saying, hey, how did your nephew do in wrestling this weekend? And he shut up. Seriously, that Chad sounds insufferable, doesn't he? Like, how can you tell that many lies and not be ashamed about it is my question. I just love how everyone started shutting him down after the whole wrestling thing. And this person comments, LOL, if you told him you went to Tenerife on holiday, he would have been to 11erife. Again, I just don't get how some people can do that. Like, what do you gain by one-upping someone? Because a lot of the times, people can see right through that BS. And before we go on to the next post, Stevie Boy wanted me to tell you all that I butchered the pronunciation of Tenerife the first time I read it. Guys, I said Tenerife, and Stevie Boy was so appalled. Anyways, on to the next post. This happened many years ago. I was working front desk at a large company. It was a pretty entry-level job, but maybe not as easy as some may think. Anyway, handling calls and visitors was a large part of my job. And since it was a large company, it wasn't uncommon to have someone walk in and ask if we were hiring. Usually, such people would bring their CV and resume, which I would then pass to my manager as per policy, and that would pretty much be it. Well, not with this lady, who we'll call Karen. Since this was long ago, the dialogues are probably not accurate word for word, but it still describes the incident to my best knowledge. So one afternoon, Karen walks in and she flat out asked to see HR. I asked her about the purpose of her visit because it was clear she didn't have an appointment. She just said to me, "I'm your new coworker." I responded, "Oh, well, let me call." She then says to me, "That was a joke. I'm here for a job." I said, unfortunately, HR wouldn't be able to meet with her without an appointment, and if she had her CV/resume, I would pass it to my manager. She then throws a business card at the table and left. Now, a CV is one thing, but just leaving a business card most certainly wouldn't land you a job here, even if you were the senior manager at Apple or Microsoft, especially after tossing it at me. I proceed according to policy, and I didn't give it much thought. A few days later, she shows up again, this time complaining how she hadn't heard from HR and our company was missing out on talent with such inefficiency. I politely informed her that HR would usually respond within 2 weeks upon the receipt of her application. She was mad because I had failed to tell her that a CV/resume was necessary, and then she left. She sat in the parking lot for an hour after that. I document the conversation because I sort of smelled trouble at this point. A week later, Karen comes in again, just to say hi because she was confident she'd be hired. But then, she asked about my salary, benefits, all that stuff, which of course, I declined to disclose. She then says to me, I think I can do a better job than you. Maybe I'll ask HR to swap our positions. I just thought to myself, if you say so. This woman was nothing compared to the crazy customers I had back when I was working retail, so I was unaffected. But I did report her visit along with the previous one to my manager, as her confidence or entitlement was a sign of trouble. As a side note, the company once had a rejected applicant harass our employees and threatened to set HQ on fire, so we took hints of trouble very seriously. My manager passes my report to HR and General Affairs, which was in charge of security. A few more days went by, and one day, Karen basically storms into the office, ranting how our HR rep was a bitch. She didn't even get an interview. If that wasn't bad enough, out of the blue, she asked when, not if, when I was quitting or getting fired, because I was occupying the position she wanted. She then asked me what it would take for me to quit so she can have my job. I basically told her to F off in the most professional manner possible. Before she left, she said, "I'll be waiting in the parking lot. Let me know when you quit or get fired." Of course, I report her appearance to my manager. I wish I could say I never heard from Karen again after that, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. She didn't show up for a couple of weeks, and I was transferred to another position during this time. One morning, I got a call from the front desk. Karen demanded to see me. All I could hear was her screaming profanities in the phone. Turns out, Karen comes in, and she realized I was replaced. She got furious because I hadn't done what she requested, which was inform her of me moving on. She asked the new receptionist about me, and the newbie directly calls me without checking her file or inquiring about purpose of visit. Karen went crazy, realizing that I got a better position in the company and that I favored another girl over her in taking my previous job, as if I had any say in the hiring. Security ends up throwing her out, and I never saw her again. But some coworker told me that she sent like 100 slandering messages to our client service inbox, and eventually the police had to get involved, and she was banned personally and digitally. Yeah, who else thinks that Karen needs to change her approach when it comes to getting a job, because acting all nutso is probably not the best way to land a position at a big company like that. And I've said this so many times before, guys, like, you have to respect the confidence of some self-entitled people. When are you going to quit or get fired because I want your job? The audacity of some people. So a few months ago, after many years of trying to conceive, my husband and I had a gorgeous baby boy. Also, my husband and I are black, which is important to this story. We were over the moon, and family, friends, and coworkers had also been excited for us. Right after I delivered, my husband emailed a birth announcement with a photo of our son to everyone in his office. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and my husband comes home fuming after his first day back at work. One of his coworkers informed him that another guy in the office, a new young employee who my husband barely knew, had been telling everyone that my husband couldn't be our son's father because, quote, that baby is too light to be his, and its hair is way too long and straight. That's a white man's baby, or an Asian's. This guy then proceeded to tell everyone what a sucker my husband was, and that his excitement over finally becoming a dad was blinding him to the reality that he had been cheated on, and his wife was impregnated by another man. And here's a side note for anyone who's still unaware in 2025. Black babies in general are fairly pale as newborns, and their skin will darken over the first few weeks. Our son was no exception, and he's now my husband's mini-me. My husband said that he immediately confronted and questioned the guy who completely denied saying anything inappropriate. He claimed he only said it as a joke, and that the baby's too cute to be my husband's, but others in the office confirmed the first coworker's account. Not only that, the guy tried to parlay his superior perception skills into some weird form of workplace clout. Fortunately, the guy got moved to a different shift that same week, so my husband didn't have to see him again. That is, until a company event this past weekend. Families were invited, and we took our son. And who should come and insert himself into our group as we're chatting with the boss but brown-noser McMouth. He interrupts our conversation, and he introduced himself to the boss, shaking his hand. When I realized who he was, my anger came flooding back. I said to him, I don't believe we've met, but aren't you the guy who went around telling everyone in this office that I must have cheated on my husband with a white or Asian man, and this can't possibly be his son? The guy just went red and silent, and the boss said to him, see me in my office first thing Monday. He walked away. I think someone's fired, and my husband said I went too far because this was already over and done with. I said it wasn't done for me until I had my say, that I was the one being defamed, not him, so am I the a-hole in this situation? In my opinion, OP definitely isn't the a-hole in this situation, and she had every right to call out that stupid coworker. Because seriously, going around the office and spreading wild rumors and making accusations about someone whom you've never met and don't know, like that is such an a-hole move, and he deserves what's coming. And the top comment on this post with over 20,000 upvotes says, you are not the a-hole. You were slandered in a way that could have negatively impacted your marriage, and you had no real recourse aside from a lawsuit to publicly defend yourself against the public the accusation made against you. An opportunity presented itself in this man's continued pompousness, and you took it. You made it clear, with your baby now looking just like your husband, that 1, he was obviously wrong, and 2, that you were hurt by this accusation. Behavior has consequences. And this person says, the racist part of his slander is also really offensive. The very kindest interpretation is that he's ignorant and happy to broadcast his ignorance to everyone around him. But I expect the kindest interpretation is being way too generous with this guy. I hope he gets his ass handed to him by the boss. As always, leave your comments below, guys. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our / entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where psycho bosses are getting their butts handed to them by employees. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.